Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3 Iron and today we are taking a look at our 3 weeks into Blight 3.8 meta overview. So that means that we're going to take a look at the popular Ascendancy, passive, skill, and even some item choices in PoE's 3.8 softcore and hardcore leagues. Now, those of you that are new to the channel, welcome. You can go ahead and like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about more discussions just like this one. For those of you that are veterans of the channel, you of course know the way how things work around here. We've got timestamps that are placed above my slightly balding forehead for your convenience, and those are of course highlighted for you and hot linked down below in the video description. If at any point in time you would like to jump ahead or revisit any of our discussion points today, you can do so using those hot linked timestamps for your pleasure. So taking a look at the overview and the meta, I had to start off with this disclaimer. Today we're going to do a lot of comparisons in between the Blight League and previous leagues because there's a lot of data out there now available for us to take a look and really study and analyze exactly how GGG is balancing, is promoting different versions of playstyles, and is changing the meta on a rotating basis every 3 months with new leagues here since the last major big release and big league, which was 3.5 Betrayal League. That was the last major overhaul, and that of course was to the Master system, and that took about a year to implement through the introduction of Bestiary, of Incursion, of Delve, and of course of the Betrayal League. Now we're taking a look at Blight and how things have changed. We've got the archetypes that are essentially in-house GGG side development templates for various ascendancies and skills, and we can really see with the numbers today exactly how those archetypes and those templates and those design choices that are being made by GGG are influencing the meta all the way throughout the past year of 2019, continuing on into Blight League. Now, first off, we'll take a look here at our percentages. This is a graph that we like to put together whenever we do a meta overview. This is a comparison, a live comparison of the highest levels of achievement. These are basically from level 80 to maybe 85, depending on whether it's hardcore or softcore, sorted based off of the ladders. So this is not a true representation of 100% of the player base, but rather this is a representation of the top end of the player base that has ascended and made it to maps beaten Katava. So if you can take a look, yellow is softcore Blight League, red is hardcore Blight League. Blue lines mean that there is no change in their place between the two leagues. Yellow means that the Ascendancy choice is more popular in softcore than in hardcore, and the red lines indicate that it is more popular, that Ascendancy choice is more popular in hardcore rather than softcore. So we can take a look, and the three dominant overarching Ascendancy choices right now that people are making are, of course, the three archetypes and the three reworks that were coming with Path of Exile Blight League 3.8. You've got the Necromancer in softcore, you've got the Necromancer in hardcore, you've got the Assassin in softcore, and the Assassin in hardcore. Then the Saboteur rounds out the last maintaining stability between these two particular types of league. The Sabo is coming in at 9% in softcore and 7% respectively in hardcore. After that, it becomes an amalgamation of all sorts of things. The only other two things that are consistent in terms of their percentage of the player base are Pathfinder at 2% in both leagues, as well as the Ascendant, which is at 1% in both leagues. Other than that, you've got the Trickster, Deadeye, Raider, and Slayer that are all much more popular in softcore than hardcore in their respective places. And then the Slayer that comes in just slightly more popular in softcore at 0.9% in softcore versus 0.6% in hardcore. Other than that, of course, defensive-oriented Ascendancies like the Juggernaut and Guardian, both of course make towards the top end or the top half of preferences, and then things really tend to peter out towards the Hierophant, the Champion, the Elementalist, even the Occultist. Pretty much 4% or lower are playing the rest of the Ascendancies. Now, one of the things that I'd like to point out here as we're looking at these different popular ascendancy choices is just how top heavy things have become during Blight League. Necromancer is made up of 43% of the player base that have, again, made it to maps and towards the top end of the ladder. 43% of the player base in softcore, and 41% in hardcore. That is not an insignificant number, and when we look in just a minute comparing Blight to other previous leagues, we are starting to actually see, and we'll see if this actually ends up being a trend or not, but we're actually starting to see something of a coalesced combination of minds that are all deciding to play the same thing at the same time. I'm not necessarily sure this is a good thing or necessarily sure this is a bad thing. I'm just starting to see that this is indeed a thing. That when GGG makes an announcement about reworks, everybody moves towards those reworks, regardless of whether or not they're stronger than other things or comparatively balanced towards other things. It doesn't matter. People are going to play the things that are getting reworked, and GGG is using a cyclical balancing pattern rather than a balancing pattern that seeks to level the playing field or make everything equal. This shouldn't be news to anybody. GGG has been doing this for a long time, where they've been rotating and coming up with flavor of the month sort of builds and patches, dating all the way back, I want to say, to maybe even 3.1, right after the fall of Oriath was announced with 3.0. where there is a clear, definitive, popular style or popular build that comes out or emerges from the ashes, as it were, of the playtesting that goes on behind the scenes before the patch goes live. It seems like there's some consistency in that across the board. That being said, it seems like more and more nowadays, there is simply one particular build style or ascendancy option that is really becoming the go-to choice. And this is becoming a trend. I think I'm worried about this if it continues in this way, simply because it means that more and more of the time there will be less and less build diversity and build options and build creativity in terms of what players are doing. And if GGG picks up on this, that players are always going to follow whatever it is that's the one more dominant rework, we actually may see, rather than 3 reworks every league, 1 rework or 2 reworks coming out every league. And that would just be... it would be a bit of a bummer, because it would mean a little bit less diversity in what's getting rotated out. That's at least one of the arguments that could potentially come out of this as a downside of this sort of cyclical flavor of the month style of balancing. Moving on to our dissection of Blight versus Synthesis, just in comparison from a few months ago, from the beginning of the 2019 calendar year, as it were, the first released league for Path of Exile in 2019. We can see that there are some differences between Blight in softcore and Synthesis in softcore, and Blight in hardcore and Synthesis in hardcore. Those differences, though, don't necessarily compare with the similarities. If you look at the chart that we've got from our Synthesis meta comparison to our Blight meta comparison, I'm not paying attention to the percentages of the league. That's not why I'm showing this. I mostly just want you to notice the consistency in the lines, the differences, as well as the distinctions that aren't being made in the player base between what's popular and what's not popular, or maybe what's a little bit more diversity or equality from the player base. So for instance, you can see, dating back to Synthesis, the top 2 ascendancies that were across the board, just simply the player's choice for both hardcore and softcore, was Occultist and then Trickster, in that order. The Inquisitor also saw some changes during Synthesis and was only off by 1 position in softcore compared to hardcore. It actually overtook the Juggernaut during week 3, which the Juggernaut in hardcore is a pretty consistent ascendancy choice for players, typically, historically, since ascendancies have come out in hardcore leagues. And yet in Synthesis, the Inquisitor, which was actually a much more offensive version of an ascendancy, was actually taking that particular spot. But it's the consistency that we're seeing now. The archetypes that GGG decides to use in the back stages, in the development processes of leagues, are then what comes out and what is becoming popular pretty much across the board. And you can see that it's very top heavy or it's very bottom heavy on what is being widespread and played across these 2 leagues. The reason why I wanted to tie these 2 leagues particular together is because they're the two largest time frames that we've got during this calendar year of 2019 between Blight to Synthesis. So it's the largest amount of gap that we could have. So it's not simply, oh, well, of course these two metas are the same because these builds carried over, or these particular ascendancies carried over. Now, there have been some slaps and some nerfs to both the Trickster as well as to the Occultist. We're not simply seeing rollovers here, and of course there's a lot of turnover. You don't see in Blight the Occultist or the Trickster necessarily in one of the top spots. Of course, you do see Trickster towards the top end, but by no means dominant in Blight League. The point here is that the two dominant things, and really three of the dominant things, are in the top 4 spots for Synthesis, whereas in Blight, all 3 of the dominant archetypes that were played on the back end and then released and revamped for Blight League are the dominant player choices. So we are clearly seeing that the meta is whatever GGG decides behind the scenes to revamp, that's what's going to be the meta. Now, those of you that are wondering, okay, Iron, what does this do for us as we're looking at maybe 3.9 or 3.10 or 3.11? Well, pretty much all you've got to do is go back and look at any of our meta comparisons over the last year, and you can simply look, okay, what 3 ascendancies got singled out as the reworking archetypes for GGG on the back end, and eliminate those that have already been reworked over the last year and find the ones that haven't been reworked over the last year, and that is where you will find our upcoming reworks for 3.9 and 3.10. I'll leave the rest of the mathematics to you, but nonetheless, we can see that there are a couple of ascendancies that are due for reworks, and we can expect them coming in 3.9 and 3.10. That's my best guess. The meta comparison breakdown between Synthesis, Legion, and now, of course, Blight is pretty telling about the top end of things, and the numbers suggest this. In Synthesis Softcore, we saw the Occultist, the Trickster, and the Elementalist at 27%, 20%, and 15% respectively. We saw similar breakdowns in Hardcore, with the Occultist at 24%, the Trickster at 19%, and the aforementioned Inquisitor at 11%. In Legion, we actually saw a spike, a much larger spike in the player base choosing a single ascendancy as the dominant ascendancy. This first happened in Softcore with Slayer going up to 42%, Trickster coming in at the second spot at 13%, and Deadeye at 11%. In Hardcore, you had Slayer and Trickster both fighting for the top spot at 20%, and then Juggernaut at 15%. We're now seeing a continuation of that trend that really was started with Legion, with Slayer taking over that top spot in Softcore, with, of course, Blight and the Necromancer Ascendancy taking over in both Softcore and Hardcore, both above 40% of the league, again, that have made it to maps or that have beaten Katava at the top end of that ladder. So it's not 100% of the player base, but the vast majority of the end game interacting player base is playing Necro or Assassin. When you combine those two, that's pretty much the majority of the player base at the top end of the game, and then Saboteur is coming in there. Again, the worrying part about this trend is growing, and I hope these numbers can really show this story, and that you can see that I'm not just pulling this as a conspiracy, out of my, slightly balding back of my head, but rather this is something that the data is showing, that players are actually becoming more and more narrowed, more and more focused, and I think more and more influenced by other voices, whether that's GGG or other content creators, about what it is that they are going to play when they boot up Path of Exile, rather than actually theory crafting, choosing, or being independent and choosing something for themselves and discovering it themselves or doing research themselves. A lot of people, and a growing percentage of people, are simply following what is meta. I think this is cyclical. I think it means that GGG is developing with this in mind, and I also think, of course, because players continue to do this, that it gives them a feedback loop. It gives the developers, GGG, a feedback loop that says, oh, well, more players are going with the things that we rework, so we ought to rework these other things in order to get players to play those other things, and it becomes a self-fulfilling sort of development cycle. Deep Delvers are our next point of discussion, and of course you can compare this between Softcore and Hardcore. Our Softcore players are, of course, on the left-hand side displayed for you, and our Hardcore players are on the right-hand displayed for you. The deepest depths that people have made it to in Softcore are 1206, and then 1004, 1000, and then it steadily goes down from there. 972, 911, in the several in the 800s, and then of course the rest of the chart going down into the 700s. One of the things that you notice about this is a lot of green gems over on the Softcore side, despite the fact that Cyclone has got nerfed as well as Tornado Shot, getting changes to, of course, its Lab Helm enchant, as well as fixing a bug with Tornado Shot. Of course, Cyclone and Tornado Shot are still at the top ends of players choosing to go deep inside Softcore Delve. In Hardcore, it's a little bit of a different story. The top end of hardcore delvers haven't come close to the top end of softcore delvers, and that's generally a trend because, simply put, you make one mistake in hardcore delve and you've got to remake your character all over again. So it's no surprise that there are several different players that have made it much deeper in softcore, but what is surprising is just how much farther guys have made it in softcore and how much more offensively oriented characters are built in softcore in order to carry them through deep delves. Oftentimes in deep delves in softcore, you don't care about your defenses because regardless of your defenses, if you get hit, you're going to die anyway. Unless you've got some sort of cheesy build that can make you somewhat permanently invulnerable, you're pretty much going to die when you get hit. So a lot of players in softcore will simply put all of their defenses aside anyway in order to blow everything up as soon as they hit them with their ranged skills. In hardcore, you can't quite do that. You're going to get hit, and rather than saying, okay, I'm going to get hit and therefore die, I'll just go all offense, well, you're going to have a very short trip in the delve. So what a lot of players will do is, of course, stack those different mechanisms that are very, very strong, and you can see consistently across the board there are a lot of players in hardcore that are using the Herald of Agony Crawler or that are choosing the Juggernaut for their deep delving ascendancy preferences. Moving on to the popular skills talking point of 3.8 Blight League. You can see in Softcore, Ray Spectre, Ray Zombie are the two most popular skills, coming in at 22 and 20% respectively. Then you've got Summon Skeletons and Vol Summon Skeletons. Really, those two should go together. That's pretty much 15% of the league that's using skeletons in some way. And then you've actually got Cyclone and a mixture of various skills, including Icicle Mine, which I've seen lots of different builds featuring Icicle Mine on Saboteurs. Cobra Lash, of course, which is the new assassin-oriented build, and then of course good old Tornado Shot and Scourge Arrow Toxic Rain as your bow user's choice. Also, as a notable mention in softcore, Essence Drain is still making the top list. Essence Drain, despite the fact that Contagion got a nerf to its radius, Essence Drain Contagion is still a fantastic build that if you did not get a chance to play it during Legion League because maybe it was too expensive, it was too meta, I would highly recommend you give it a shot, especially if you're playing softcore, because there's so many different options for you in terms of ascendancies right now that can really make Essence Drain Contagion a viable option for you, and it's a fantastically fun build to try. I highly recommend it. It's one of the builds that I just played nonstop during Legion League. In hardcore, we've got similar trends, but with maybe a little bit of less diversity, where we've got more players playing Ray's Spectre and Ray's Zombie, of course, coming in at the top spots. Then, of course, Summon Skeletons and Vol Summon Skeletons coming in at 9% of the league when you combine them. Then Cyclone, then Icicle Mine. And then you see some differences. You see Herald of Agony making it towards the top of the list. You see Summon Raging Spirits. You even see Vortex and even Divine Ire making a top of the list appearance on 5 links for hardcore players. I'd love to hear what skills it is that you are using. I'm surprised that there aren't more people using Minion Instability, the Popcorn Summon Raging Spirits build. It's one of the builds that I'm looking forward to trying out once I wrap up stacking strength on my Juggernaut Zombie Mancer in hardcore Blight League. Moving on to the popular items breakdown, you can take a look and see that Watcher's Eye in softcore, as always, is an incredibly popular option because people, once they get the Uber Elder option set up to get that build on lockdown and farmable, then of course people are going to rinse and repeat and farm that particular boss until they get the Watcher's Eye that's going to make them a bunch of bank or that they're going to use themselves. So Watcher's Eye comes in at the top, whereas it barely even makes an appearance on the hardcore ladder. I want to say it was like 20 or 30 scrolls or 20 or 30 scrolls items down, so 2 or 3 scrolls from the items list, but nowhere near the top like it is in softcore. Unending Hunger, of course, makes an appearance in both the softcore and hardcore popularity list, and that comes as no surprise because Unending Hunger, of course, buffs your specters, and of course, when the vast majority of the league, or close to the majority of the league, are playing the Necromancer, either 43 or 41% respectively, and 20% of each of the league are using specters, then of course, lots and lots of people are going to be using Unending Hunger. One of the interesting things about this is it's nearly 1-to-1 correlation in terms terms of popularity in softcore, that most of the players who are using Spectres are also using Unending Hunger, whereas in hardcore, it is nowhere near the correlation. So just something that's interesting between the two. Victario's Charity, of course, we gave that in our preview of what items are going to be popular during this league, along with the Baron, both of which are very, very popular. Rumi's Concoction, of course, a fantastic option for building block into your character, along with some armor in the unique flask slot. Alberon's Warpath used to be a 1-alch unique, and now, of course, it's very popular because so many people are strength stacking and playing with zombies. Moving on to the oils for this league, of course, the new league mechanic introduced through Blight allows us to allocate passives onto our amulets by anointing them through the usage of oils. Now, oils in both hardcore and softcore Blight League are incredibly expensive the higher up you go. They're the league mechanic, they're the thing that everybody wants at the moment, and it makes sense that they are very, very expensive. One of the things that I find so fascinating about Blight League is that this is the first time, at least in trade leagues, that we have got a price point comparison between passives and the economy. This is the first point in time, at least to my knowledge, somebody else can point this out if I'm wrong. This is the first point in time where we are no longer simply evaluating passives on the tree for their opportunity cost in terms of levels or skill point rewards from the particular story campaign, but rather we are evaluating passives on the tree based on their cost to anoint on our amulet. So, for instance, if you are playing softcore Blight League and you would like to, let's say, get Soul of Steel, which is incredibly powerful because it can give you, I don't know, +1 maximum all resistances across the board, well, good luck getting it without breaking the bank because it costs 3 golden oils, and 3 golden oils in softcore are about 1.3 exalted per oil, so you're looking at about, what is that, 3.9 exalted, just about 4x for a passive to get anointed onto your amulet. So regardless of whatever the cost of your amulet is, add 4x to whatever it is that you're getting. A lot of the times that's an entire budget for many players throughout a league is 4x. Not all of us. Some of us are, of course, going to use principles from Bank of Exile as well as playing the game to make a lot more currency than that. But for many players, we don't have as much time to put into the game, and so 4x is a lot of currency. So, of course, Soul of Steel is one of the top-end priced passives that's available through Oil Anointment. Also up towards the top is Constitutions and Whispers of Doom. Whispers of Doom, of course, allows you to apply an additional curse, and it's way up far side of the witch end of the tree, and if you're not going up there, of course, it's going to be very expensive passive point wise to go get it, but since so many players are playing Necromancers this league and are probably already going to go up there to get the next notable that is very close to Whispers of Doom, which is +1 to your +1 to your zombies, +1 to specters. Of course, it's not going to be quite as popular as something like Soul of Steel, which is going to be more popular, but is also, of course, more expensive and is much, much further down its south end of the tree towards the Marauder side. We've also got something like Constitution, which simply gives you 14% increased maximum life, as well as some flat life. That's also very expensive, along with Sovereignty, which gives you reduced mana reserve, Spiritual Aid, which again, most of the league is simply selecting because there's other nodes around it, but nonetheless, it is a very, very popular anointment for amulets should you choose to simply grab it with an anointment rather than spending several passive points for it. So it really depends on how much currency you want to dump and how much you value your passive points. What is the price point or the price value that you place upon your passive points versus spending that in currency and saving those passive points for you to spend elsewhere. Skittering Runes and Charisma are also very, very expensive for players to acquire using golden oils as well as silver oils in order to anoint. Well, thanks so much for watching. What Ascendancy choices have you made thus far in 3.8 Blight League? I would love to hear down below in the comments what builds you've been playing, what Ascendancy options you've been playing. I, of course, have been mostly playing with my Juggernaut Zombie Mancer Strength Stacker. That's where most of my work has been on Blight League Hardcore. I also built a Necromancer that died at level 76, and I've also got a Deadeye that's still alive in maps playing Scourge Arrow. That's what I've been playing, and those are the decisions decisions that I've been making for Ascendancy choices in 3.8, but I'd love to hear what choices you've made. Also, what has been your primary DPS or your 5-link setup? I only recently got a 5-link setup on my Juggernaut, and that 5-link setup has been for Slave Driver Spectres. And then lastly, what have you chosen to anoint your amulets with? I, of course, have chosen beef, which is an incredibly cheap oil anointment combination for passives to get, but it's 30 additional strength, and I'm a strength stacking Juggernaut, so it makes sense that I would go out and spend a little bit of oil to go grab some additional strength to give me some more additional strength to my zombies, as well as to hopefully give me some additional zombies down the road as I stack them. Those are some of the cheaper options that I've made. I've seen a couple other folks go for Soul of Steel as well as Whispers of Doom, but what choices have you made for your amulets and your anointing? Thanks so much for your comments and for watching, and I hope today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.